Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here, joined as always by my colleague with the 42, Murray Kinsella. Murray, how are you?
I'm good, Gav. It's good to see you and hear your voice again. Highlight of my week always. How are you?
Oh, it's mutual and I'm fantastic. Thanks very much. The real highlight, of course, is chatting to the big man, Bernard Jackman. How are things there?
Good, thanks. Yeah, looking forward to a bit of a change-up. Champions Cup rugby. So, yeah, always some nice clashes to chat about, and obviously the Munster-Leinster game to look back at.
Yeah, I've been rumorating over that one. Looking forward to digging into it. It is a nice change of pace, all right, to be chatting about the provinces and some massive games coming up this weekend. Some comings and goings from within those setups as well, respective setups. We'll chat about the Women's Six Nations, which kicks off this weekend towards the end of the show as well. Plus, we'll field your questions from the members' WhatsApp group, members.the42.ie. If you want to join up there, get all of the extra podcasts, get access to the group and all of the added content provided by the 42 for its members. Leinster Munster, let's go. I feel as though this will be a podcast filled with wild sweeping statements by myself, but I want to actually focus on Leinster to begin with, Murray, because it feels like anytime Leinster and Munster play, the massive talking points after the games tend to be in relation to Munster, because we were saying just before we came on air, there's always so much more to say about a team that isn't winning or doesn't win a particular game. We all have sort of prospective solutions, and from my point of view, from the point of view of Munster fans, you want to air your grievances as well. It's cathartic to do so, and sometimes there's a little bit of a danger of nearly overlooking the team that actually just won. Leicester just won their fourth Pro 14 in a row. It's an unbelievable achievement by them, and I actually wanted to just focus on Leinster's performance to begin with before we get into Munster, because watching the game back, and it did take a second watch for me to be able to remove the emotion from it and my own personal disappointment. I objectively loved watching Leinster play in that game. I thought it was the best performance I've seen them put together in quite a while, even though there were missed opportunities that will probably fester a little bit in them and will have disappointed Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster. Those are things that can be put right. We can chat about whether they're a kind of an ongoing concern in a while, but just as an overall package, I thought it was a dominant Leinster performance, but even kind of aesthetically, stylistically, just enjoyable to watch. And for them to be able to just produce that in a final where, bear in mind, the likes of ourselves, or at least a couple of us and plenty of other people were saying, this is Munster's chance. This might be a kind of a narrowing of the gap, to use that phrase that we've been using over the last few weeks. Leinster just took that notion and threw it in the bin and produced a really accomplished display.
Yeah, it was a very complete performance, and it was probably telling of what Leinster have become that Stuart Lancaster informed us that if you'd been in their review, you would have thought they lost the game, because he's focusing on a couple of those missed chances that you mentioned. And I think Leinster probably feel if they put away two or three of those missed chances, particularly in the first half, the score margin would have been obviously much bigger. There certainly were really strong chances. They got held up a couple of times, and despite whatever Stephen Larkham insists, I don't think the match was really evenly matched in the end. I do think the gap has closed in the previous three meetings, and they were much closer battles, but this wasn't. It was a really complete Leinster performance. They struck brilliantly off set piece attack, really incisive, really clever, really skillful. Everyone running beautiful lines, timing their runs well, looking like a threat even if they're not getting the ball. The handling from the likes of Henshaw and Byrne and Keenan was excellent. And even the forwards brought that bit of skill level as well. Andrew Porter and Tyke Furlong, when he came on as well, in particular, were prominent in that regard. But everyone's comfortable handling the ball and running convincing lines and being a threat. So it is a very complete style of attack when they play like that, and they opened up a little bit more in that first half than they have probably in the previous ties between the teams. And it was really exciting. They didn't take those chances, and in the second half it needed a slightly different approach, albeit still with some lovely attacking thrusts. You think of the build-up before Jack Conan's score, and it's a really clever play where they carry in midfield and bounce back to Conan himself to make the line break and lead to all that pressure that allows them to go into their 5 metre game, which is just so effective, as we've seen and talked about countless times. From there, it's that kind of squeezing boa constrictor style of play that just piles pressure on you. Luke McGrath kicking in behind Keith Earls was kind of the symbol of that. Ryan Baird making strip tackle and choke tackling guys. Robbie Henshaw absolutely obliterating Chris Farrell in a brilliant bit of defensive work where he gets around the corner, really hard-working and makes a massive tackle on the end of it. So yeah, it was very complete, and 10 points probably didn't do it justice. It showed that there is that variety to Leinster, that they can do it in a few different ways. And on top of that, you have virtually every single player delivering a really strong performance in their own right, as well as the guys who came off the bench. And that competition we've spoken about before continues to drive that side of it. So yeah, it was a really impressive, really joyous performance. I agree with you, to watch and to enjoy. And it's exciting to think that they can maybe even improve on that this weekend. That's certainly their sense, that they left a lot behind them in that game. As Lancaster said, it looked like they'd lost in their own review. So I'm really intrigued to see what they can do this weekend against a Toulon team that has an absolutely gigantic pack. I'm sure we'll come back and talk about that. And they'll feel they can be a little bit more aggressive against Leinster in that regard. But certainly this Leinster team can cut you apart. They can outmuscle you. They can pressure you. They can frustrate you. And it's really enjoyable to watch.
Certainly is. I got a little bit of flack on Twitter afterwards, Birch, because in my emotional state, I was saying that Leinster, as they were kind of awaiting the trophy presentation and stuff, the way they were just sort of standing around chatting, it was like, you know, a few young lads meeting up outside of a funeral or something, where you're kind of like, good to see you, patting each other on the back. And I understand, obviously, how that would have pissed off a few Leinster fans. Rory O'Connor pulled me up in it, not that he's a Leinster fan, but he was kind of like rejecting the notion that I suggested, which was that it seems to mean very little to them. And all I meant by that really was comparable to Munster. It means very little to them. You could imagine if Munster had won the game, they would have been bouncing around the place, excuse me, because it would have been a real landmark for them. Whereas for Leinster, not only winning the Pro 14, but actually beating their closest rivals to do so on the way, you know, they were semi-final or final, has become so routine now that it kind of, it feels like job done, a case of job done for them afterwards. And I don't know, did they even get a sense that they'd won a trophy, if you know what I mean? It was just a case of winning the game and doing it well. And you can imagine it would have been different, say, if Leinster win the Champions Cup, they will be bouncing around the place, even if there are no fans there. But that's kind of what makes this impressive as well, Bernard, is that, as Murray said, every single one of their players to a man put in a brilliant individual performance. This was a final, but it was almost as though they didn't treat it like one. They treated it like another game in which everybody came to the fore, everybody performed out of their skins, and collectively there was a sense of inevitability about it from the opening minutes, really.
Yeah, I think they probably expect to win it, and it's probably more relief and kind of satisfaction that the job is done rather than elation, you know. And also the way the game went, even though it was 6-6 at half time, I think Leinster probably felt in control. And, you know, so you're not getting that sudden outburst of emotion. There's no fans to feed off. You know, when you know probably with 20 minutes to go, you've won the game. And that's certainly how it felt. And even at half time, I think they probably felt, look, they just tighten up a little bit. The game is there for the taking. And they have reached an unbelievable level of consistency. And it's ironic, actually, because I suppose my criticism or question around Munster is not bringing that emotional aspect to their performances, whereas Leinster seem to be able to get a level of consistency no matter who plays, you know, regardless of getting too over the top about it. They just seem to have, I suppose, perfected that art of, you know, understanding how important it is to perform, respect for the squad, you know, do your job, do it well, and win the game. And I think, you know, from a Leinster point of view, and you know, similar to what you said beforehand, we got caught in Premier Sport post game. We had an half an hour, and at the end, I had to say, "Listen, stop talking about Munster," because we just talked about Munster for 20 minutes, and we hadn't actually credited the team. And that's probably a testament to Leinster's consistency and the fact they've won 4 in a row. But we still should, as Murray just did eloquently there, you know, highlight how good they were and how they are the champions in this competition, and deservedly so. Yeah, I think just something to say there as well is how interesting coaches' framing can be. I mean, you know, isn't it amazing that Stuart Lancaster, the takings Murray got from Stuart Lancaster's press conference was, it felt like a defeat to Leinster, and what we hear out of the Munster press conference was, it felt like a win. You know, and to a certain extent, I'm obviously exaggerating there, but they saw huge positives, and they saw a closing of the gap, very little between the two teams. And I suppose what's really important is it's not how they frame it publicly; it's how they deal with it internally. And I do think Leinster will definitely look at the areas where they didn't, execute and let Munster off the hook. But they will see, the fundamentals of a very strong performance, and I'm sure they acknowledge that and recognised it was a good performance. And I would hope Munster didn't, like realistically inside those four walls, analyze it properly and realize that there's a gap there now. There's a gap that they have to catch. And if they don't change how they go about these knockout games, it's going to be the same thing over and over again. And that's only the squad will know that, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine, because I can, even though you're setting yourself up for a bit of question and abuse by coming out and being ultra positive in the press, that's part of the job. But what happened inside the Munster review on Monday morning will be fascinating for me, because I think if they genuinely think that was close and they defended really well, and if the weather was better, they would have been able to attack better, then I don't think they're on the right track, to be honest. I think if the weather was better, Leinster would win by 30. I think Munster's defence was all over the place, and a team like Munster shouldn't be delighted because they scrambled well and they held Leinster up over the line and forced, it depends how you frame it. You could say that the pass from Rory Loughlin, to Larmer, that's great defence by Earls. But I would say, how did they get down those channels so easily? You know what I mean? So it's all relevant. But I just wonder where the belief is in Munster. Did they come to Dublin really believing they could win? Because that was a week I think they should have believed they could win, because they have won some tight games. They have had more time with Graham Rowntree, more time with Larkham. Leinster obviously loaded their bench, which means, we have a chance to get a fast start here and get ahead of them. It was a week after the Six Nations, so Leinster had less time to get cohesion, but yet they didn't perform. So, it's fascinating where Munster go from here. Can they? Traditionally, they were always a team that could bounce back quickly. We'll know a lot more about them this weekend.
The contrasts, it's a great point, Birch, because the contrasts here are so riveting and enthralling, and they should be, because they're such long, bitter rivals, I suppose. And even the belief one is massive. Larkham spoke about that. He said, this is basically what we've been talking about in our team meeting, that the players got to believe in themselves. And I thought it was quite striking watching it. Like, Munster were 6-6 at half time, and Leinster had missed a load of opportunities. In any other contest or tie, that is a massive fillip for the underdogs, I suppose. You go, hang on, they actually haven't scored with all this pressure. But Leinster came out and looked like they still expected to win. They still believed they were going to win this match. And that's based on having done it so many times against Munster over the last while. Whereas I felt watching it that Munster's body language wasn't that positive way. It looked like they kind of had almost that inevitable feeling inside themselves. Another contrast is the players. We've just mentioned Leinster's players basically to 23. Obviously, Johnny Sexton didn't last long out there, but everyone played well. I don't think Munster's players can say that about themselves on a massive occasion, that their best players had some of their best games. That just didn't happen. Gavin Coombs was the best player on the pitch for Munster. He's a 23-year-old guy. He actually probably looked like the one who really believed, I'm going to go and win this match. And maybe there's a hangover there for the guys who've been through it too often with Leinster. And there's probably a contrast even in how well coached the teams looked. Leinster at all times looked like they'd nailed their detail around their set piece. Obviously, some of the fluency in their phase play attack, their defence was really effective. Whereas Munster had some really basic slips in defence that they therefore required the scramble. Like, I know Larkham was painting that as a positive, but some of the opportunities they gave up are way too poor for a team of their ambition. And then in attack, obviously, again, we didn't see anything convincing to suggest that they've made up that gap and made those improvements that they've needed to make against Leinster. So there is just such a contrast between the whole setups and the organisations, even behind the scenes. You look at how well, obviously, Leinster's conveyor belt is flowing. And for me, Munster's doesn't have to be exactly the same, but there is young talent coming through, but that side of things can be so much better as well and create even more depth in their squad. So it is really interesting to compare the two. And I know Munster probably shouldn't be doing that and they should be going about it their own way, but it's hard for us not to do it.
Yeah, and I think the question mark about the defence, I think how Leinster approached the game in that first half tells its own story, because they actually played with way more ambition than they do against a lot of teams who kind of have their defence in order. So as we know, Murray, we've spoken before, Leinster like to kick a lot, get A-zone entries through kick pressure, and they grind teams down early, and then they only really release the handbrake when they've got a score and they got scoreboard control, whereas it was the exact opposite. In a final against their biggest rivals, theoretically, they went after them and played with a lot more wit than they normally do. So that didn't just happen. That's obviously what they saw that week in Munster's defence, and they went after and look, they didn't get the scoreboard pressure or the scoreboard return that they would have wanted. At halftime, it seemed to be a tactical change, plan B, let's beat them up. And, that worked as well. But, and I agree with you, at 6-6. So we said last week, and the reason I tipped Munster was, I said, look, they only need to be better than Leinster for 80 minutes in the last 4 years, once for 80 minutes. At halftime, they'd actually done it. They'd managed to go in at halftime level. And it was only 40 minutes then they needed to get. And, for 20 of those minutes, Leinster weren't going to launch the bench. So you had 20 minutes where theoretically it was your best players against a weakened selection, even though it's not weak, and they didn't manage to come out. And I wonder where the Munster players' heads are at, because it's a really experienced team. I mean, bar Gavin Coombs, who's 23, I agree was their best player. The rest of them are all seasoned campaigners. Most of them are internationals, but yet in a final they couldn't really find that extra 5 or 6% you need in a final.
Let me bring you back to Leinster momentarily. We have a couple of questions from members and then we can discuss Munster in greater detail. There's one from Barry Lampkin here who actually has a question about Leinster's defence, and kind of in keeping with the theme of the start of the show, or what we were saying at the start, Barry was wondering if Leinster's defence are getting enough credit for last Saturday, he adds then that maybe there's cause for optimism this weekend for Munster, that their own defence was excellent in the final, and apart from the Christmas game against Exeter, Toulouse have been far from solid in defence. We can chat about Munster in a while and that Toulouse game. But what about Leinster's defence? Are we guilty of pinning all of Munster's bluntness on their own incapability and maybe turning a blind eye to what Leinster did well in defence, Murray?
Well, there's always two sides to the coin, and absolutely that's a really impressive part of Munster, or Leinster rather's armoury. They work exceptionally hard off the ball in defence, and it's something that, again, you probably only appreciate when you're watching it back and you're noticing how someone like Robbie Henshaw pops up in the position he does, or how Andrew Porter absolutely works his whole off to get back when Gavin Coombs makes that break and even gets back up off the ground and jackals over the ball to get add another little split second, and then you see how well the defensive line is set, and that's down to how they train. Like, so much of what you see on match day is a reflection of how a team trains. That's positive and negative, and Leinster clearly put a massive amount of onus on that. Again, Stuart Lancaster's influence is often flagged around the attack, but he's put as much of his time and effort into improving their defence. He often speaks about how, defence wins championships. I've seen him kind of really underline that point in a number of different presentations, and you can see absolutely that he's done that with Leinster. There's a real pride and real intent in their defence as well as their attack. So yeah, absolutely is a big part of it. Even set piece wise, they'll be pleased with how they repelled the Munster maul at times. That would have been an area Munster would have hoped to get a kind of bit of momentum from. Even the scrum, I think Munster had been looking at that as a potential chance for them to get into the game, but absolutely Leinster dominated that area, really, didn't they, and got on top and got some key moments from that as well. So yeah, the defence is a massive part of it and they do deserve credit, but you've kind of got to look at both sides of that coin, and Munster should be disappointed with their inability to really stretch and break, apart from that Gavin Coombs example, break down the Leinster defence.
One for you here, Birch, from Kieran Pearson. He says, Owen and Murray had a really interesting conversation on Monday's pod about game managers. And Owen went into great detail about how they factor them into the game plan in Japan. This is on the members pod on Monday. And Kieran says, it's a consistent talking point that Leinster's, and by extension Ireland's, game management is fronted by Sexton. And when he's not there, the difference is evident. Should we be looking at some kind of game manager's system like Owen described, or what do Leinster need to do to help with the over-reliance on Sexton as their sole playmaker? He just adds that he'd be really interested to get Birch's view on this system as a coach, and he says that he's just using Sexton as the example with this.
Look at that. Munster would have a game managers group, and that would change weekly depending on selection. So, for example, if Joey doesn't play, and Ben Healy played, he'd be part of that in the week. And normally what they do is they're involved in looking at the opposition, and designing the strategy and talking to the coaches around the what ifs. So I think it's not something that's unique to Japan. Like Czechia was doing this with us back in 05. So normally it'd be the hooker, line out caller, number 8, 9, 10, and maybe O'Driscoll used to be in it. Obviously, Easton Asiwa was regularly in it. So there was a group of 7 or 8 players, mainly around position, really. As in the line out caller would always be in it, no matter who. So depending on selection, but yeah, I think obviously someone like Johnny, because of his personality, and it's probably his super strength. He's probably not a Bowden Barrett in terms of speed, etc. But he's brilliant at game management. So that's why I think it's more obvious when he plays or that he's bringing it. But no, I'm sure Larkham, Roundtree, Van Gran would be working on that. Every coach is at a professional level. It's not rocket. It's obvious. But we often, when we see a team win, we think they've managed the game brilliantly. And they're and obviously the example Luke McGrath with that kick, etc. And they have, but there's probably more to it than that. It was probably, I think, every area of the game Leinster were completely dominant in. But yeah, it's a good question, but I wouldn't blame it on that. I'd be more critical of Munster or ask the question around, where their heads are at in terms of what they want to achieve in their careers for Munster. And I think that this generation, since obviously 2009, 2010, there's a strong chance now they're going to finish their careers with no trophy. And I don't accept it's just Leinster, that Leinster have too much power and too much money and too much internationals, private schools, all that stuff. Because I said it this week somewhere else, but like Glasgow, Connacht, and Scarlets players have a Pro 14 title. So Leinster had a dip, and Munster didn't take advantage of that. Paul O'Connor's last game, from what I believe, for Munster was in Ravenhill against Glasgow, and in a final didn't get it done. And there's been lots of criticism. Rob Penny, Axel, Razzie wasn't criticised, but he didn't. He was there. Johan, and they haven't been able to win a trophy, no matter what coach and group they've had. So at some stage it goes back onto the players. I think, and I think the board and the RFU have given them an unbelievable amount of support between coaching, facilities. I mean, their facility's the best facility in Ireland. It's better than Leinster's. They're both very good, but it's better. They obviously have 2 brilliant stadium, and they've been supported in terms of, okay, but they lost Sebo and Donegal Ryan, but in general, they've always been able to keep their best players, and they've been able to recruit some high profile non-Irish. So, yeah, I just think, I wonder how desperate are they to change the pecking order, and how desperate are they for silverware? How desperate are they to do something special? I don't know.
And when you're talking about honest in-house review, you have to hope that is part of it, that the coaches are putting that pressure onto the players and not just going, I don't want to make enemies here, I don't want to upset Peter Manny, Conor Murray, by saying, why aren't you playing as well in a big Munster match as you have shown you're capable of for Ireland? Even someone like Dialende, who's obviously come on massive money, and I know he put in massive work rates last day, but he made errors that contributed towards some of the Munster deficiencies. You'd hope that those players are being put under pressure internally, because they'll be the first ones to question, as Bernard says, to question the things around them and to put pressure on. And you'd hope the players have that honesty amongst themselves as well, because one thing Munster did have at that time when they were successful was absolutely zero tolerance for someone who wasn't there to be a winner. They just cut that person straight out of the group as soon as possible. It was just unacceptable to them. And that has to be part of it. It is in Leinster. They're all there to win all the time, relentlessly. The first thing they're thinking about after that Pro 14 final is Toulon. Let's go and win a European Cup. And again, yeah, I'm contrasting again, but it's such a close to home example, I suppose, for Munster.
Yeah, just on that, I was reading a book last night around high performance, and just something that came out to me, and I highlighted it here. Conflict isn't always a bad thing. Healthy and constructive conflict is a critical component of high functioning teams. This is where great emotional intelligence comes in. Understanding and appreciating various viewpoints involved in conflict are the key factors in its resolution, right? So it's just this idea of being really hurt, being really frustrated, being really annoyed with where you are in the status quo, and having those like honest conversations, sometimes causing conflict or having conflict to get better. That's common in winning teams as well. And how they continue to win is they have those conversations while they're winning. And like I would have to hope that Munster, Ulster, I'm sure they are, but if there's something wrong in the system and the program or the relationship or the game plan, they just need to fix it. And you need to, because your career is so short. I mean, to spend 10 years at a club like Munster and not have a silverware, I mean, it's very hard to believe it could happen. You know what I mean? Realistically, given what happened in before, and it's so hard to get that legacy in history. So, like, I want all the provinces to be able to beat each other, and at the moment, and like, look, it could change. It could change this week, but unfortunately, in semi-finals and finals, there hasn't been that ability to step up and win knockout rugby that obviously they were built upon.
Well, just to continue to focus on the players, and we'll get to the coaches in a moment, because similar with Munster's blunt attack versus Leinster's impressive defence, there are sort of two sides of the coin here as well. Gavin Coombs is symbolic maybe of what's going wrong with Munster, but not him personally, more so actually the senior players with whom he now plays, in that he was the only one who seemed to meet his own standards at the weekend. He didn't seem to be inhibited by the weight of history that people keep going on about, particularly attributing that or projecting it onto, say, the likes of Conor Murray, Peter O'Mahony, who came immediately after a squad that won trophies. Coombs has come through a Munster setup that hasn't won anything in 10 years. He's 23, and maybe you can make the argument it's like the fearlessness of youth, and you don't have those hang-ups at that age, generally speaking, anyway. But to me, it seemed as though if you contrast his performance with all of the big players to whom we were alluding, and even look at Conor Murray's performance in that game versus what he did for Ireland literally a week beforehand. It's chalk and cheese, and maybe you can make the argument, okay, well, he put a lot into the Six Nations, he was tired, but so did a lot of Leinster's players who showed up on the day. I think, like, when you look at Coombs versus some of those senior guys, there has to be some kind of a psychological element to this where maybe it is just as simple as belief, but they're going into a Leinster game. Maybe they can sort of externally convince each other that they're going to win or whatever, but internally they don't have that genuine belief that they can do it. Because even Van Gran, when he came out afterwards saying, once Leinster build up a lead, like it's kind of game over. Like, that's ostensibly what he said. I am paraphrasing, but it was kind of like, they got a score ahead, we just couldn't catch them. That's an unbelievable thing to say for a Munster head coach. I don't know if he believes even, But so
just on that, yeah, Gav, like, I think if you're looking at it logically and like, Munster should have had belief, because the game at Thomond was pretty close. They've had a couple of close games where the difference actually hasn't been as vast as it actually was on Saturday. So, and also, I mean, Keith Earls had a phenomenal Six Nations. Conor just came off a big game. Peter obviously been suspended, but should have been fresh. CJ and Ty Byrne was up for player of the tournament. CJ has had a good tournament, and now we're all saying, oh, maybe it was too much emotionally for CJ. We're finding reasons why they didn't perform, rather than actually ask him why they didn't, or look, sorry, they should be asking themselves, not us asking them. But like, that's the challenge, is that I think for Munster to beat Leinster in a semi-final, they need Conor Murray to have a worldly game. They need Damien Delande to absolutely take the game by the scruff of the neck, like in 2009 when Rocky Elsom, had an unbelievable game in that semi-final. That's why you bring those players in, because they are world class. But also, not just the players you bring in, the world class players you have that are homegrown, that represent the province and the club, the Peter Mannies, the Keith Earls, the Conor Murrays. They need to perform. And like, you saw Sexton come off the bench, and he went flying into a tackle. I think it was against Joey. But that's your captain. That's your most probably precious player in terms of age. A lot of miles on the clock, and yet he is desperate to. He would have been fired up. He didn't play against Leinster start. but he comes on and he wants to just put his shoulder to the wheel. And that's, at the moment, and this is what Leinster were always criticised and never not having, that we used to be the team who it was more important to play for Ireland than it was for Leinster. And now it's obviously not, they've got a really good balance between both. But Munster, I don't know, I can't, it's very harsh, but I don't see that like desperation to change the status quo.
I agree, right? And that's kind of what I was trying to get at with, say, somebody like Coombs versus some of the guys that we've watched lose to Leinster or lose in European semi-finals over the last number of years, that when we speak about the culture of a team, and it can be a bit of a buzzword that maybe gets people's backs up at home, but it does exist. And that you mentioned earlier, Bernard, how Munster's big players, like their frontline players, don't seem to know how to raise their game for a game like this necessarily as individuals, and that sort of translates then to a fairly, fairly blunt collective performance. Like, I wonder, just over the course of time that they've been playing against Leinster and losing to them, has it actually damaged them to the point of it being irreparable, is what I mean?
Well, I think that's what Leinster will hope. That's so every time you beat a team, you hope you're psychologically scarring them, and that's going to make it easier in the future. And like, obviously that's Leinster's mandate. That's what they want to do. And if they have achieved that, it's, credit to them, because they've done it through hard work and through consistency. But it's the opposite is for the others. What are they going to do differently? And I think the reason I hope Munster would be able to perform and maybe win was because they've gone to Claremont this year and had a massive win. They've had more time now with Graham Rowntree and Stephen Larkham. So all the things that I excused them for last year, Carberry was back. There's lots of things falling into play, but yet, they still didn't seem to be able to go and attack that game with a different mindset, have a plan B, get physically dominant with Leinster. It was like, effectively, it was the same type of plan that they had before. And like, when Leinster win those high balls, Munster actually were very weak under the high ball themselves. So I don't know. I think it's frustrating, but also, like, it's not just the coach. It's not just a game plan. It's the group. The group have a huge amount of influence in a knockout game, and the leadership group have to have a huge influence. And I just look at it wasn't good. It wasn't good. And
but the group
going to have to be better than that.
The group obviously have a massive say in it, as you say, Birch. But if you look at that group, and even if you look at the leaders within that group, there might be there's a possibility that, say, for somebody like Peter Manny, who's the captain of that team, for somebody like CJ Stand or Murray and other more senior figures, they don't know how to beat Leinster in a meaningful game. They haven't done it. So after many, many years, it might be a case of, like, looking around at each other, kind of going, like, we hope we do it this weekend, but we actually don't know how to do it. There's nothing to suggest that we can do it, because every time we try, we fail. So you kind of have to front up, particularly for the younger guys in the squad and so on, but like, that there might not be an actual conviction, really, is what I'm saying, because they just haven't done it before.
I think Larkin was basically alluding to that, and the reason he's come out and said everything is rosy is because I think he's very aware of that, and if he doubles down on what we're saying, then that just damages confidence even more ahead of another massive match this weekend that they've absolutely got to win at home. And it's, I suppose, how do you change that picture? You either change the players, which obviously isn't going to happen. Most of those guys are contracted through. You don't just get rid of a massive bulkier team. That's not how it happens. But potentially there are little tweaks you can make in that personnel. And Gavin Coombs is obviously a unique enough example because he's so physically developed and can already excel in a game of that magnitude. There aren't a lot of guys like him, if we're being honest, but there are guys who have the potential to be like him. And that part of the picture does change things. I mean, any renewal of a team is often about the personnel coming through with an edge about them, like Gavin Coombs, who goes and I'm going to go and beat Leinster. I don't care about this history. Someone like Thomas Ahern hopefully developing into the team and bringing that attitude as well. And that has to be part of it, absolutely, for Munster. But you've also got to work with the players who are there. And if that is, Gav, the psychological issue, then that's got to be worked on as well. They're working with Peter Kruger, I think, a South African sports psychologist, has been with them for the last while. And you'd hope they've absolutely been addressing that and coming up with strategies to improve it along with Johan van Graan. Because I do agree with you. I think that is an issue. There's almost an expectance of losing, and that's not good enough for Munster.
I agree with what you were saying as well a minute ago, Bernard, about the fact that when you go through a succession of head coaches, and this is a prevailing problem, that the players are, or a lot of those players are, the common denominator. But I would slightly separate this Van Graan era as well, and particularly this season, where if you looked at Munster's 23 at the weekend, certainly 1 to 15, or I want to say 4 to 15, because I think Leinster just have a better front row than Munster's, no matter which way you line them out. I would say, like, Munster individually, as individual players when they're at their best, we're kind of on a par with Leinster. A couple of mates of mine, like, again, Munster fans now to be fair, so maybe rose-tinted glasses or whatever, were like, I think Munster might have a better team than Leinster just this weekend, and Leinster were resting a couple of players as well. But, like, if you're not able to get the best out of those players, I know that absolutely there's a part of it that's player responsibility in that they're not summoning the type of performance required on the day, but obviously it is a coaching thing as well. Even aside from game plans, there has to be surely a coaching input in bringing the best out of players. Isn't that actually the entire job of coaching?
Yeah, no, it is. But I'm just saying, like, historically, this group haven't done anything different. You know, so if you put Warren Gatlin in there, if you put Joe Schmidt in there, you know, unless the players actually change their ability to play well for Munster. And look, it sounds like these players have had a way better careers than I had. So it's not a go at them. I think they're brilliant players. Just the problem has been, you know, they haven't been able to do it in the red jersey at key times. That's all. But as individuals and accolades, absolutely legends of the game. And I think probably if I was to criticize Johan, I think, you know, maybe he's too loyal to, like, form isn't really a guarantee. Form or being out of form isn't really a factor for selection. It seems to be, you know, he goes for the tried and trusted in these games. And I think he's maybe being a little bit cautious with some of those younger players. And I would say, I'd say, you know, you're going to have to give them their shot. If they lose this weekend, you know, I would use the Rainbow Cup to try and find, you know, 2 or 3, 4 players who can start next year. And, you know, I think I agree with you about front row. I think Leinster's front row, Leinster's backup front row are stronger than Munster's killer apart. And I would say the business to sign Jason Jenkins doesn't make any sense to me. I think if they're going to be allowed to bring in a non-Irish, they need a tight end or they need a hooker. You know, a big physical hooker who can help their set piece, who can give them that ball carrier around the field. So yeah, little things like that are obviously, you know, we have to call them into question as well. I would say, you know, a reaction this weekend, beat Toulouse, or look at what the squad is going to be looking like, what your starting team could look like if you're in a Rainbow Cup final in 12 months' time or 14 months' time, and be in a better position to beat Leinster. So, you know, and the guys that jump to mind are the Hodnetts, the Caseys, the you know, Thomas Ahern's, you know, maybe a Knox. So they're not going to be allowed bringing a foreign tight end now, so maybe a Knox or Solana and Solanoa, and then hooker wise, you know, Kevin O'Byrne has been pretty good. I don't know what they have in the academy. Have they got a big physical hooker like Dan Sheehan? Don't think they have. But yeah, that'll be that's how I would see it. And I think you get enough guys who want to, like, you create a new identity. Like 2 or 3 players can change the whole dynamic of a team. And luckily, these are going to be homegrown Munster players. So hopefully they can create, you know, their own identity together and you know, change the team. And obviously then, you know, you'll have RG coming back. And yeah, you've a chance. Like they have talent. There's no doubt they have talent.
Well, that's kind of the point I was trying to make when I say that there might be a bit of a distinction between his predecessors and Van Graan and his era, if you like, or particularly this season again, because he actually has a far better squad than Rob Penny had. You know, like he has a better squad than Munster have had in the last 10 years. Some of the years in which Munster didn't win a trophy in the last decade, they unquestionably weren't good enough to win a trophy. You know, they were actually quite weak compared to what they had been in the previous decade. You can't say this about this Munster squad, again, just going through it individually. It's a really good squad. It's one of the top squads in Europe. It's a top 2 squad in the Pro 14. But the reality is, even having brought in 2 World Cup winners, albeit one is sort of struck from your plans immediately, with Damien Diolande starting in the centre against Leinster, you're no better against them than you were last season. You're no better than you were 2 years ago. You actually are arguably worse. That's where I kind of wonder. That's where I would say that a coach shouldn't get a free pass, if you know what I mean. Because a coach's job is to put that talent together, amalgamate it, make it into a better package than it was, and they're not. I'm throwing that to you, Murray. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's very fair. I wouldn't disagree with that. I agree with you. They've stated aims of winning trophies and beating Leinster, obviously, to win those trophies, and they're not doing that. And you and Bernard have both mentioned how they've been given resource, and again, the RFU have given them leeway, and they've got private backing to bring in 2 big players like that. Unlucky with Snyman, but absolutely, there's been lots of tools at Van Grant's disposal, as well as this kind of new wave of talent which Munster have been waiting for, really, to come through their own pipeline. Players who have the calibre and potential to go on and play for Ireland. So absolutely all the tools are there, and I think absolutely there's still, even at this stage, question marks about whether Van Grant can turn that into a trophy. I mean, they're a very good team. Leinster obviously they're a unique example of a brilliant club side. We should say that. I don't think there's many in. I think they beat most national teams, to be honest with you. They're that good. And Munster are a good team. They're not a terrible team, but that's the standard you're aspiring to. So you've got to be held to that. And absolutely, the coaching ticket haven't done that. And Larkham and Rowntree have had their time to settle in. And the scrum obviously was a weak point last time. The attack has shown signs of progress, as in Clermont. We saw a couple of nice strike plays. But that didn't deliver on the big occasion either. So there's absolutely justified scrutiny on them as coaches. I personally don't think there's going to be change there ahead of next season. Van Grant has another year in his contract. But if it doesn't improve or show signs of making that next step next season, well then I would imagine they'll be looking elsewhere.
We're talking about next season for the last few seasons. Like, I think the reality is that it probably won't, because what's the trend? Like, why will next season bucket? I don't see it. But as you say, there are a lot of factors in play. And like, for clarity, when I'm saying they're not better now than they were last season, they actually have been better all season. I just meant they weren't better when it actually mattered. They have a chance, obviously, to put that right a little bit this weekend. You'd wonder about suffering another defeat to Leinster in the circumstances and what that might do for confidence. Certainly nothing good. In the lead up to a game against a Toulouse team who I would say are inherently confident, even if they're not even at moments when they're not in great form. They just have that ability to switch it on for the big occasion, maybe kind of the antithesis of Munster in ways. I wonder how this game is going to go, and I wonder, like, Is that defeat to Leinster, Bernard, an opportunity for Munster to kind of muster that sort of emotional performance to which you alluded earlier, where it has to be a backlash to something almost that brings the best out of them in that time-honoured Irish tradition?
Yeah, hopefully. I think if there's not a backlash, it'll be difficult. Toulouse have some injuries. In fairness, they've got a boost. Joe Tokore's been cleared, having been cited for an incident last weekend, so he's a boost. But Reinhard Elstad's not being able to play because he was back in South Africa is a blow to Toulouse and a boost for Munster. He's their enforcer to break down. And there's a couple of doubts around someone at Ramos and Peter Aki. I think they've got a few backs actually carrying knocks. So they're not coming in ideal shape. We're poor last weekend against Montpellier. But having said that, they have brilliant players and a way of playing that's exciting. And we saw them in Ulster, in Ravenhill. They can score beautiful tries from long distance. So, and that's the fear. And as I said, we spoke about Munster's defence maybe being I think the problem for Munster is they're very narrow in defence because they've got so many jackal threats and don't seem to readjust and get width. And I could see Toulouse targeting that and getting rewards there.
Murray, Bernard touched upon it a minute ago, the Jenkins signing, and we'll get to that in a while. I haven't forgotten about it in case people are at home are kind of wondering where we're going to chat about it. But how do Munster actually beat Toulouse? Is it possible, do you think? Or are we kind of reliant on almost memories of previous teams summoning these types of performances? Like, how did the two teams stack up against each other this weekend?
It's an extremely difficult challenge because Toulouse, on top of the exciting attacking strengths they have, do have a good meaty pack as well. They've Julian Marchand and Cyril Boyd come back this weekend in the front row, probably alongside Famuina, who's obviously really experienced. And even if they are missing Elstad, there's a range of kind of really mobile, gritty, hard-nosed back five players there to pick from. So they do have a tendency still to get loose. Like, I watch them as much as I can in top 14, and it's unbelievably exciting because they score those tries but also give up chances to the opposition, and they can put themselves in really difficult positions that a team like Munster will use to their absolute advantage with strong maul, kicking back into the corner, pin them into their own half when they make mistakes with their handling or throw loose offload. Absolutely. And again, Munster aren't a terrible team. I'll just reiterate that. It's going to be competitive again this weekend. It generally has been competitive against Leinster. Obviously, it wasn't that way last weekend to as great a degree. So we can't just completely discount Munster. But I am a little bit worried because Toulouse have such a variety of threats, and the Thomond Park crowd factor is gone. You know, Toulouse have come over for a couple of quarterfinals in the past, probably when they were going through their own rebuild and period of uncertainty, and they were well beaten by Munster. But obviously there was a raucous crowd there on both occasions, so I would be a little bit worried for Munster, to be honest, this weekend.
Bert, how do you see it going in the end?
I have to tip Toulouse, to be honest. I think they're themselves racing Exeter and Leinster, the top four in Europe, and Munster for sure could win, but I think Toulouse will have too much.
We'll chat, obviously, Leinster, Toulon in a moment, but just to touch back upon that Jenkins signing and chat about a couple of Munster departures while we're on the topic as well. Murray, what do you make of the Jenkins signing, and I guess the messaging around it, if that's not too political a phrase? I guess just in terms of the reasons, well, the supposed reasons why they left two of their indigenous players, if you like, go, with JJ Hanrahan moving to Clermont and Darren Sweetenham off to La Rochelle, was kind of, I suppose it was made out to be for budgetary reasons and so on. And the arrival of a foreign player in those circumstances probably didn't please everybody, despite the fact that obviously Jason Jenkins is a really, really good player, Springbok in 2018, and highly regarded in South Africa as well.
Yeah, I think purely on Jason Jenkins himself, I think it's a good signing, but I think it's the wrong signing in the wrong position. And I actually just think it's wrong as well that he's coming in. So I'm kind of grey on this. I think he's going to add to their squad 100%. This guy's a huge specimen, 6'7", 125 kg. He's springy in the line out. He can carry close to the ruck. He'll take over some of Stander's dirty work in that regard. And they absolutely had to replace that, I think. I can see it from their point of view. They've had this shock of suddenly losing their kind of talismanic 50 test cap, one-time line, possibly two-time line this summer, completely out of the blue, really. And they immediately went to kind of resolve that. So I do think he'll add to their squad. I can see him, to be honest. I know they say they're going to play him blindside flanker. I can see him and Snyman starting in the second row with Tyg Byrne at 6, Coombs at 8 and Peter O'Mahony at 7. And that's, to be honest, an extremely good back 5-year scrum. But I agree with Birch. I thought a hooker should have been their priority. A really top-end hooker would add so much to that pack, or tight heads, as he says. And then I just think it sends out the wrong message. I really do, in terms of the young guys we've mentioned, in terms of, and this is purely optics, another South African player. Like, so much of the reaction has been based on that fact. And I know that's kind of xenophobic maybe for some people, and like, why not a South African player? But it just adds to this sense that Johan van Graan is just turning to South Africa every time he needs to get a solution to what's going on in Munster. And that just disenfranchises some people 100%. I can get that. Munster has always prided itself on its really kind of community identity, and I 100% understand some fans have kind of turned off from it that way, and they feel that they're losing that. I do think it'll cost the likes of Thomas Ahern and Fineen Wycherley game time, and I know Munster are probably saying here that they don't think those guys are ready to go and start Champions Cup games, which is really hard for those players, I can imagine. And I know Thomas Ahern is learning all about being a professional. he's had to sit out loads of training sessions here and there as he gets to grips with that side of it. But I just think, make that work. He's your generational talent. Get him in there as soon as possible and make it work. You know, put some onus on yourselves to get a guy of that potential fast tracked. So yeah, I'm a bit mixed on it. I think it makes them a better squad, better team, but I think it's wrong.
Yeah, Bernard, I guess the feeling from Munster is that, and they're on the record as saying some of those younger guys will learn from Jenkins. They'll learn from Jenkins. And of course they will. He's a fabulous player. He's also 25. You know,
they won't learn
from Jason Jenkins. Is not going to teach Tom. Like, he's maybe 3.5 years older than him. There's so much bullshit said in the media, and that's part of it. The one thing that mattered that Stephen Larkham said was, we want to win trophies. You guys understand that. People hold us to that standard, and that's what this is about. The next year it makes them a better team. It's very short term, and that's an issue. Like, why could that money not be spent on a longer term thing, like Munster fixing the Limerick club system? Like, there's so much talent there. There's so many good people working in those clubs. It needs to be joined up more. They can get, I think, really good players out of that far more often than is the case now. There's one Limerick guy in the academy, which is absolutely bonkers. And however many 100k they're paying Jason Jenkins, you can make a massive dent in sorting that out for years to come, not just next year. So that's probably the frustration from my point of view.
Just on this, I actually don't blame Johan really, because when I was in Grenoble, I wanted to sign lots of players. I go to the president, he tell me no money. I have to go back down to my office and make another plan. Or in Dragons, you know, there was obviously financial limitations, plus Welsh qualified was the priority. So I understand what a coach would want to do, but I also think it's important someone above you says, look, this doesn't make sense for us, you know, and obviously there's an expectation to win trophies, but we will give you everything we can within certain criteria, restrictions to do that. And I think, you know, I'm not sure whether it's the Munster CEO or whether it's, you know, David Nusafora, but I think this is one of the ones that they should have blocked. I don't see, obviously he's a good player, and obviously, yeah, he potentially could play with RG in the second row, but it's not, you know, there's obviously Sam Carter up in Ulster. You have RG Snyman. There's 2 foreign second rows already in the country. They can't play for Ireland. So I just think that, look at Munster and say, look at, you know, where do you really need where's the weakness? I think it's front row. And obviously, you know, where's your depth chart? Yeah, you have Fit Wycherley and you have Thomas Ahern, who we like a lot, have potential. Thomas Ahern could play for Ireland, you know, if he comes through the level we think he can, and this is going to block him. That's outrageous, you know. So it's just one of those things where we have this system that everything should be aligned and make sense. And here's an example where it doesn't look like it makes sense from a player development point of view, and blocking a young Munster player or a couple of young Munster players who have potential. You know, it's not as if there's no one in their academy who has that profile. So I think it's very strange. Surely
they will learn from them. I know you both absolutely slapped that down, but like,
you're no chance. Absolutely no chance. There's nonsense.
Well, what do you mean when you're working alongside somebody and they're good at what they're doing?
Learn how to hold his chopsticks because he's been in Japan. Like, you won't learn anything. You won't learn anything from him.
Via osmosis, like when you see somebody doing their job well, you don't pick up anything from that.
To a degree, Gav, but like that's not the reason. Yeah, I don't think that's enough of a reason to. I suppose it's definitely not the main reason they've signed him. It's a handy thing to say when they're announcing it. I mean, this has happened loads. The main reason you sign players is to make yourself better on the pitch. That's
someone like Albie Matchison. I would say, yeah. There's you know, he's a very smart, very experienced kind of game manager. He could teach Craig Casey something, you know, a year ago, whatever. But not this signing. No.
Peter Steph Detroit maybe might have taught a few lessons. Could have been him.
Yeah, well, he would have, yeah. So that was the initial one they had lined up, and interesting enough that's the one the RFU weren't happy to green light. That certainly would have made them a better team, even if it was just for a year. But I suppose it makes it a little bit more confusing, even that the Jenkins ones gets through. It's a more affordable signing, and I think the issue around Peter Steph was that it was just too much money at a time when everyone's getting like pay cuts, salary cuts in Munster especially. It would have been really tough, I think, for the group there to take that. A guy coming in, even if it was with private investment, on that kind of salary. And I can understand that. I think that was I know it would have made Munster a much better team, but I think they already have their 2 Springboks. That's enough. But they've got another one in anyway in the end. And yeah, it's a curious one.
Curious indeed. What about the 2 lads heading off then? Just a word on them, Murray. It's a great opportunity, obviously, for JJ Hanrahan. He, I would have imagined, would have preferred to have stayed at Munster, at least back when contract negotiations were going on. He probably, I'm maybe making too many presumptions here. I would suggest that he would have felt let down that maybe they didn't meet not his demands, but maybe his suggestions contractually, his and his agents, because he's been absolutely pivotal to what they have done well over the last couple of years, particularly in domestic competition. Nonetheless, he lands on his feet in a major way. If they kind of felt they couldn't offer him more money and that there was an absolute bottleneck at 10, which there is with some of the talents coming through, with Carberry back fit, then this is a hell of a backup plan for JJ to go over there and play for a team that actually, the way they play, could really bring the best out of him. He's going to be in contention really with Camille Lopez, and I do think stylistically the way they play suit him as well, whereas actually what we've seen of him at Munster over the last few years, I often feel as though he's a small bit inhibited in that he has to nearly bottle up his own instincts at times. So a chance at in his prime years, to flourish potentially over there.
100%. It's a great move. It's a fantastic club. I really like the city as well. It's going to be a really enjoyable experience for him. They're completely rugby mad, and he'll be embraced as long as he performs on the pitch. They can turn if you don't. But I've no doubt that he will contribute. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see him playing against Munster at some stage in the future and doing well. A great signing for Clermont as well to, as you say, compete with Camille Lopez, and a guy who still probably has a bit more left to get out of his potential, I think, and he'll feel that way. And it didn't always work out at Munster. He had kind of ups and downs, but a very kind of resilient guy who kept coming back for more, who kept putting himself in tough positions, even when it didn't always work out. And I'm really pleased for him to get a move like that. The other one being Darren Sweetenham. I'm really excited to see what he can do with La Rochelle, with Ron O'Gara building his confidence back up. He's an unbelievably good athlete, really complete skill set, I think, when he's at his best. And Joe Schmidt obviously liked what he saw. He was really unlucky with a couple of injuries. Van Gran just didn't seem to rate him for some reason, whatever that was, but he could really fly over there. They're a really ambitious, growing club, play a lovely brand of rugby, and he is still only 27, so there's absolutely buckets of ability left in him, and 2 really good moves. They've gone to clubs who they'll probably sit there in a whatever, a few months' time and go, I'm actually in a pretty good position here. I'm at a really good club that are on the rise, so fair play to both of them.
100%. The way Sweetenham plays ball, he was definitely French in another life, I think. I think he'll take to everything over there fairly seamlessly. Looking forward to watching them both play in France. Let's look ahead to another French team's visit to Dublin then, and Leinster, Toulon. We were just looking at the Toulon team before we started recording, Bernard, and it's a fairly physical looking pack, and you kind of are reminded of what they can bring to the table. How does it stack up, like Leinster versus Toulon? It just, I guess, on paper, who's the better team here before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of it?
Look, Leinster are a far better team, but in fairness to Toulon, what they've created and what they've done in Europe, historically is massive. And in fairness, this team is still full of stars, but they're way off where they were with the likes of Wilkinson, Gesso, Bakis Bota, etc. They're very much in transition. They were very poor last weekend against Leon, and Manon got a red card. They're a very emotional team, to be honest, and probably mirror their head coach, Patrice Calazo, who's unbelievably he's the polar opposite of Leo Cullen. He's hot-headed, volatile, and he obviously was in La Rochelle before Toulon, but there may be a reaction, and they've picked an absolute monster pack. I mean, Estebet and Taufenua in the second row, Tolafua at hooker. There was a rumour Becca Gigiashvili, the Georgian tight head, who I actually had in Grenoble, wasn't going to be allowed to play because of quarantine. He'd been back in Georgia, but he's got cleared to play. So they have a massive pack. they've got Serran at captain at 9 is high tempo 9. Villiers, the wingers is excellent. Like full of individuals, but Leinster's overall organisation and fitness levels and ability to make few errors will strangle him. I feel.
I can't wait for the scrum battle. I know you're going to be excited about this one, Birch. Obviously, as you say, a really powerful pack, and Leinster again last weekend showed probably the improvements they've made there since the Saracens. I suppose they were demolished that day, weren't they?
Yeah.
But this is going to be an interesting test. Tell us about Gigashvili. I know you coached him.
Yeah, so he was in the Georgian army till he was 21. Never played rugby. Started to play a little bit of rugby socially. There's a load of French agents who have contacts in Georgia and are constantly looking for props to go into all levels. We see the ones in top 14, but you go down to Federal 3-4. There's Georgian players making a living, and our video analyst was also the team manager of Chambéry, which is about an hour from Grenoble. Some of the our listeners might have flown in there for ski. So he joined there, and just really hardworking, really strong. Loved the gym, like doing 2 or 3 gyms. They were part time, but he was doing 2 or 3 gym sessions a day. At times he collapsed under the squat rack because he just putting so much weight on, and but he didn't know how to play rugby. He didn't know how to play rugby, but in Federal 1, a Georgian tight head is compulsory pretty much. So he ticked that box and he learned the game. So anyway, he was going to be a foreigner for us. So we started to track him a little bit, and he looked like he got huge potential, incredibly strong. He's like Andrew Porter basically with tattoos, with more tattoos, and he's just a little squat dynamic. So we signed him, but we signed him for 2017. In 2015, because we felt he needed another year playing in Federal 1 to kind of learn the rest of the game. And the deal was that he would come every Tuesday to us and do live scrums with us to give us an extra scrummager, but also for us to be able to keep a track on him and get an extra scrum session in a week. And we agreed that with Chambéry, and unfortunately, we agreed a contract where we couldn't take him back on a weekly basis. It was basically they wanted him locked in for the whole year, and that was it. So we didn't think he'd be ready, but every Tuesday he'd come and absolutely mince all our props, and we were getting pushed around the field, and we were just going, oh, if only you could have him. We went to try and buy him out of his deal, but there was no way they'd give, because they actually got promoted that year to out of Federal 1. And and then obviously he came to Grenoble in 2017 and had a stormer, and Toulon I think bought him off Grenoble. So and then he's like, he managed to become the starting tight head for Georgia, which is phenomenal. It's the out half. It's the Johnny Sexton of Georgia would be the tight head. He's got fan clubs and supermodels chasing after him. So it'll be interesting to see him play.
Sign me up to the fan club.
I'm on board. Niall has a question here actually about Leinster and how they might go forward from last weekend. So he says it's been touched on a few times recently that Leinster have been dependent on attritional forward play to score tries, accounting for centre/backline injuries, brackets, enforced 6-2 splits in certain matchday squads, close brackets, time with Ireland for Henshaw/Ringrose, and double figure number of midfield combinations this season. Do Murray and Birch expect Leinster to more likely utilise and execute in the backline in Europe and the Rainbow Cup? I'll throw that one to yourself, Murray.
Yeah, I actually think I think that we'll see a bit of a flip from what we saw last weekend, and they'll start with that more squeezing, attritional, I suppose is the word that was used there, approach, and then we'll see them open up a little bit towards the final quarter of the game. I think they'll be keen to kind of sap the life out of Toulon as much as they can and not give them any sniff at all, particularly away from home. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it is, because it's very true, and we've seen that with Toulon this season. So I think we'll see them open up in the second half of it. And even though they didn't finish those chances last weekend, there is a kind of bounce in energy you get from opening up a team like they did to Munster. Like, what a thrill it is for Keenan to get an offload from Van der Fleer and soar through and find Robbie Henshaw in behind. They absolutely should have scored that time. We saw Keller breaking off Andrew Porter's little tip pass as well. That's really lovely stuff in phase play, as well as the set piece stuff we mentioned earlier on. So they'll have a bounce in their step in that regard, and it'll absolutely be part of the plan, certainly from set piece. But I think, we'll see a bit of a turning on its head of how they actually play this weekend.
Leinster for you, Murray?
Yeah, Leinster by 10 to 15 maybe.
Do you think they'll have that margin of comfort as well, Birch?
Maybe more. I think they could open up on them. I think Toulon are still a team of individuals, and I don't think there's any team who have the cohesion Leinster have. I'm not saying that Leinster are guaranteed to win the competition, but in terms of cohesion, I think they are very much on the same page, and I think they'll pull away. Yeah, I think it could be one-sided.
Connacht in Welford Road to face Leicester, traditionally struggle in England. Sean Farrell had a great 42 read on the site about that very matter last night, I think, Wednesday night, if people want to check that out. Murray, I guess the reality is that this game, or the lead up to it, has been dominated by a couple of high profile departures from Connacht in the coaching setup of Jimmy Duffy, most recently the forwards coach, but also Nigel Carolan, whose work kind of needs no introduction or fleshing out for listeners of this podcast, or even kind of more casual rugby fans as well. He's been really influential in Irish rugby at a number of levels. So they're blows, aren't they? It feels, I guess, when you lose one, you lose Carolan. He's almost a marquee name in Connacht, the way he goes about his job. That's a blow. But then it's compounded really by losing Duffy, another integral part of Andy Friend's setup.
Absolutely. Guys who've been really part of the furniture for a long time and have put in a massive, long shift of hard work and emotional investment into the province and delivered really good results. Absolutely. In terms of some of the stuff Duffy's done with the pack and at the breakdown, Carolan's attack, obviously, and both of their work behind the scenes in developing players has been absolutely integral. They're both ambitious guys, though, and I would imagine that they're both keen to be head coaches. There obviously was strong rumours at one stage that Andy Friend was going to be departing at the end of the season. He obviously signed on in the end, but I wouldn't be surprised if both those guys had their eye on a potential promotion, and now are maybe going to try and move up the ladder somewhere else. I'll be fascinated to see where they end up, because they're both very talented Irish coaches, and you'd love to see them get their hands on a project and kind of really drive it on. So wait to see where they go. And it is a pity that it's supposed to been dominating the week, because it's some big game for the province. As Bernard mentioned, they've had silverware in the last decade, whereas Munster haven't, but the Challenge Cup was always going to be a chance to do that. It's a tough challenge away from home, given they're missing Bundyaki and Jared Butler to their suspension, so it might just be a little step too far without some key guys like that.
Yeah, what do you reckon, Bernard? Can they kind of get over that hump in England this time around, or will Leicester be that little step too far this time?
Yeah, I think I've been impressed by Leicester. They've seemed to have adapted to the Steve Borthwick kind of regime. They brought in some good South Africans, actually, ironically, and more to come. They've tapped into that market. Very good pack. Come back to the old school kind of Leicester way. So probably the kryptonite for Connacht, the way Leicester play, I think. Connacht can open teams up, but I like the way Leicester are developing, and I probably think it's probably... I fancy them to win it.
So Leinster will be the last Irish province standing after this weekend of European competition, say the two boys. Grim enough, apart from for Leinster. Pleased for them.
Ulster will win. Ulster will win.
Oh, sorry, pardon me. Yeah. Didn't even touch on it.
Yeah, Ulster will be a really interesting game as well. Harlequins have had a bit of a renewal, I suppose, since Paul Gustard left. A few months ago, they've been on a bit of a kind of winning run or successful run, and Jerry Flannery actually has taken on a lot more responsibility now. He's running the defensive side of the game as well, and they'll have a confidence with Ulster coming, and Danny Kerr's in form, Mike Brown's playing some good rugby, obviously Dom Brandt has been consistently good, and Marcus Smith is knocking on the door for England as well, so they've got lots of individuals in form. But having said about Connacht trying to win a trophy, I think Ulster just cannot miss this chance. I know it's only the Challenge Cup. It's not a top tier frontline competition, but you can get so much out of getting silver or getting a medal. And Ulster should have the strengths to go over and limit what Harlequins can do with their kind of attractive attacking rugby. So I think it's a really good chance for Ulster.
It's true enough, Bernard, isn't it? As much as it might not be the be-all and end-all for clubs or even players or coaches, just to get that notch on the belt of a trophy, it prevents a conversation a couple of years down the line like we're having about Munster now, where they haven't won in 10 years. Like, because if Ulster were to win a Challenge Cup, you at least have that to point to. It's something from which you can build.
Yeah, thanks to Murray for that. I'm going to throw my Challenge Cup medal in the bin now. It's worthless.
You know what I meant. You know what I meant.
No, absolutely. Look at it. It's huge, and it can just galvanize a team, get them that one win, and that can build confidence. So yeah, no, I think it's definitely a valuable competition, and it's definitely can be a stepping stone to obviously winning your domestic competition or a Champions Cup. So no, I think it's important, and obviously Connacht will be chasing that, and Connacht have the ability to beat Leicester. I just said I think Leicester, their pack are very well organised at the moment, and probably a little bit more power. And likewise, Ulster should be one of the favourites for that, and should really see that as their holy grail, for this season.
Can I just apologise to all Challenge Cup winners, actually? The best medal I have is East Munster Development B League, I think, to be honest.
Cherish
I think
it.
We beat Clonmel that day, but that's my highest glory. So yeah, who am I to say?
I was on the bench for a Bone Shield final in 2009, so about on par. I'd like to apologise for Ulster for completely forgetting their game. It just slipped my mind because I had the other three provinces written on the running order when we were chatting about the two Connacht coaches. Let's chat Women's Six Nations before we wrap, Murray. And it's back this weekend, first and foremost. Ireland will be waiting another week before they line out themselves. But I guess because there was so little information and so little clarity in advance of this tournament, it feels like it's come out of nowhere in a way. I'd imagine massively exciting for the players. But I think you were on a press call as well earlier. Was it a launch or something along those lines? So give us a lowdown. What are you expecting from it?
Yeah, there was a launch earlier this weekend. So for the first time, it's obviously a standalone competition and a standalone launch on its own. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the interest levels and media attention are, given that it's not, I suppose, in the shadow of the men's competition, because that's such a dominant part of the calendar. Tournament organisers are certainly hoping that this can be a kind of regular occurrence now, have its own window. And they do want to go back to the regular kind of Six Nations. This is a condensed format, as you mentioned. It's a little bit different, but at least we're getting a competition away this year. And it's a massive few years ahead now. It's been really, obviously, there just hasn't been international women's rugby with the pandemic, but it's starting back here. We're going to have the World Cup postponed until next year. There's a new WXV competition to come in 2023. There's talk of a Lions tour even in women's rugby, although that's very early stage as a kind of feasibility study. So there's loads going on. It's a really exciting time, and it's just brilliant to see it back on the pitch for Ireland, as you say, in the second round. Away to Wales, a tough enough opening assignment before they play France at home. But I'm intrigued to see, with kind of 20 plus camps behind them, all training ground, obviously, matches very different, but how they've pushed on from where they left off. Because last year, before the pandemic hit, there were promising signs of players really kind of grasping the ambitious approach, making better decisions in attack. They've worked extremely hard on the defensive side of their game and absolutely had to, but there was massive intent around the breakdown last year. They were really ferocious around that area, as well as making some really good reads on the wing. There's some exciting players, like obviously Bevan Parsons has been a superstar, a breakout. They have Amy Lee Murphy-Crowe now coming in from the sevens, and I would love to see what she could do in a 15s pitch. She's been a sensational try scorer on the series in sevens. So the big question is right nailing down that 10 shirt and exactly who they move forward there. It's been kind of disjointed and changing selections there ever since Adam Griggs has come in, but there's loads of reasons for excitement there, not only for Ireland but for the game as a whole. And yeah, let's see how it pans out over the next few weeks, because it could be a really kind of defining and a new era really for the women's game.
Certainly, we'll get into it in a bit more detail when Ireland are preparing for that game. So this time next Thursday, we'll chat about that in more depth. But for now, let's wrap. It's an hour and a quarter gone. Bernard, thanks a million as always. Pleasure.
Thank you.
And Murray, thank you as well. You'll be back on Tuesday with Owen Toulon, looking back on the Champions Cup action. Yeah, cheers, Gav. Hope you feel better after that. I do not. Thank you. Thank you to all of the 42 members as well. Members.the42.ie if you want to support our independent sports journalism first and foremost. But also you get so many extra podcasts, insiders, newsletters, all sorts of good stuff. Tune into the Football Family, which came out earlier this week. Gav Cooney, Paul Dollery and David Sneed picking the bones from the Republic of Ireland soccer team's troublesome international window. And as a fan of both sports, I have to say I've had a truly dreadful week. But brighter days are on the horizon beginning this weekend, let's hope. Mind yourselves until Tuesday for the 42 members and until next Thursday for non-members. Till then, go easy.